When my brother-in-law laughed and called me princess in front of 30 relatives at a 4th of July barbecue, I thought the embarrassment was over. I was wrong. The strange part is that the day had started out pretty normal. It was Saturday, July 4th, 2020 in Knoxville, Tennessee. My younger sister Amanda and her husband Derek hosted the family barbecue every year. Their backyard backed up to a small patch of woods, and Derek treated the place like it was some kind of private ranch. By 3 in the afternoon, the driveway was packed with pickup trucks, SUVs, and folding lawn chairs. Kids were running around with sparklers they weren't supposed to have yet. Country music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker sitting on the deck beside a cooler full of Bud Light. I almost didn't go. At 48, I had gotten pretty good at avoiding situations that left me exhausted, especially family gatherings. My divorce had been finalized 8 months earlier. My ex-husband Mark had moved to Charlotte. The house was sold. Most of my friends assumed I was doing fine. I wasn't. I was functioning. There's a difference. I still worked. I paid my bills. I smiled when people asked how I was doing. But some mornings I'd stand in my apartment kitchen holding a coffee mug and realize I'd been staring out the same window for 20 minutes. Amanda knew some of that. Derek didn't care. To him, I was just the quiet older sister who never talked about her job. And people tend to fill silence with their own stories. Derek's version of me wasn't flattering. "There she is," he announced when I walked through the gate. Several people turned. I forced a smile. "Hey, Derek." He looked me up and down. "Still working for the government?" "Yep." "What is it now, paperwork, human resources?" A few people laughed. I shrugged. "Something like that." Truthfully, I had learned years ago that the less I explained, the easier life became. Derek pointed a pair of barbecue tongs at me. "See, that's what drives me crazy." "What?" "You always answer like you're testifying before Congress." More laughter. I grabbed a bottled water from a cooler. My father chuckled. "He's got a point." I smiled politely. The conversation moved on. For about 20 minutes, then Derek started again. He always did. We were standing near the grill when he launched into one of his favorite topics, hunting. According to Derek, every deer he'd ever shot was bigger than the last one. Every fishing trip was legendary. Every story ended with him being the toughest guy in the county. Eventually, he looked at me. "So, Rachel." I already knew I wasn't going to enjoy whatever came next. "Yeah, you know how to fight." The question came out of nowhere. Several people looked over. I took a sip of water. "Depends," he grinned. "Depends on what?" I set the bottle down. "Depends on who's asking." A few cousins laughed. Derek seemed encouraged. "No, seriously. Could you fight if somebody came after you?" I should have walked away. I should have changed the subject. Instead, I said the first thing that popped into my head. "Only hand to hand." He blinked. "What? Only hand to hand?" Then I added, "Knives were optional." For a second, nobody said anything. Then Derek burst out laughing. Not a chuckle. A full-body laugh. The kind where people look around for an audience. "Oh, come on." More relatives joined in. Amanda shook her head. "Derek." "What?" he said. "You hear that?" He pointed at me. "Knives were optional." Even my father was smiling. Derek wiped his eyes dramatically. "Let me guess. I already knew where this was headed. They called you princess?" The table erupted. A couple of my nephews laughed so hard soda nearly came out their noses. I stared at the ground for a second. Not because the joke hurt. Honestly, I'd heard worse. A lot worse. What bothered me was how familiar it felt. Being underestimated gets old after a while, especially when people mistake privacy for weakness. I looked back up. Derek was still grinning, waiting for a reaction. So I gave him one, just not the one he expected. I said one word. "Hades." The smile stayed on his face. For about 2 seconds, because nothing happened, at least not immediately. Most people had no idea what the word meant. My father looked confused. Amanda looked confused. Derek looked pleased with himself. Then I heard glass hit concrete. Clink. Everybody turned. A man sitting near the outdoor bar had just dropped his beer bottle. Not completely. He caught it before it shattered. But beer spilled across the counter. His face had gone pale. The man was Frank Donovan, 72 years old, retired Navy SEAL, neighbor of Amanda's father-in-law. I had met him once before, maybe twice. Quiet guy, silver hair, walked with a slight limp, the kind of man who listened more than he talked. Now he was staring directly at me, not casually, not curiously, staring. The entire backyard seemed to go quieter. Even Derek noticed. "Frank," somebody asked. Frank ignored them. His eyes never left mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I felt something uncomfortable twist in my stomach, because I recognized that look. Recognition. Not certainty, but recognition. Like somebody trying to remember where they'd seen a face before. Slowly, Frank stood. The music still played from the speaker. Kids still ran around the yard. But everything felt distant. Frank walked toward me, one step at a time. Nobody laughed anymore. Even Derek looked uneasy. When Frank stopped in front of me, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Who gave you that call sign?" Every muscle in my body tightened. I hadn't heard that word spoken aloud in years. Not by someone who understood what it meant. I looked at Frank, then at the relatives surrounding us, then back at him. The old anxiety I'd spent years burying started creeping up from somewhere deep inside. Because if Frank knew the name, then he knew something else. Something I'd spent a long time trying to leave behind. And judging by the expression on his face, he wasn't the only one. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Frank asked his question. The backyard suddenly felt smaller. I could hear the crackle of burgers on the grill. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A kid dropped a plastic cup near the picnic table. Normal sounds. But inside my head, everything had gone strangely quiet. Frank kept looking at me. "Who gave you that call sign?" he repeated. I glanced around. Every relative within 20 feet was watching. Derek looked confused. Amanda looked concerned. My father looked like he was trying to figure out whether this was some kind of joke. I forced a small smile. "Long time ago." Frank nodded slowly. His expression changed. Not disappointment. Understanding. The kind veterans recognize in each other without needing an explanation. "Yeah," he said quietly. I figured. Then he stepped back. Just like that. No dramatic speech. No announcement. Nothing. He picked up a towel and wiped the spilled beer from the counter. The conversation eventually resumed. People started talking again. Music got louder. Kids started yelling. But something had changed. I could feel it. Especially from Derek. For the rest of the afternoon, he kept sneaking glances in my direction, trying to solve a puzzle. Around 6 o'clock, I finally grabbed my purse. Amanda walked me to my car. The evening sun hung low over the neighborhood. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine." "You seemed uncomfortable." I laughed softly. "That's because Derek turned family dinner into an interrogation." She sighed. "He's an idiot sometimes." "Sometimes." That got a smile out of her. Then she grew serious again. "Who was Frank talking about?" I looked away. A flag across the street fluttered in the warm breeze. "Just old work stuff." Amanda studied my face. After 45 years of being sisters, she knew when I was hiding something. But for once she didn't push. "Drive safe." "You too." I got into my car and spent the entire drive back to my apartment wondering whether I had made a mistake. Not by attending the barbecue, by saying that name. The problem wasn't that people knew it. The problem was what came attached to it. Memories. Questions. Things I'd spent years trying not to revisit. My apartment sat on the west side of Knoxville near Cedar Bluff Road. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom. 3rd floor. Quiet. Exactly how I liked it. I kicked off my shoes, fed my cat Maggie, and sat on the balcony with a glass of iced tea. The sun disappeared behind the buildings. Traffic hummed in the distance. For a while I just sat there, thinking. People assume military stories are exciting. Most aren't. Most involve waiting. Paperwork. Long hours. Bad coffee. Missing birthdays. Missing funerals. Missing entire chapters of your life. The exciting moments are usually the ones you spend years trying to forget. I never told my family much about my career. Partly because I couldn't. Partly because I didn't want to. Keeping things separate felt safer. My marriage had suffered because of it. Mark used to tell me that living with me felt like living beside a locked room. At the time, I thought he was being unfair. Years later, I wasn't so sure. The divorce papers didn't mention secrecy, but it sat between every line. Around 9 that evening, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. "Hello, Rachel Morgan." The voice was familiar. Very familiar. I sat upright. "Holy hell." The man laughed. "Nice to hear from you, too." I hadn't spoken to Colonel Jim Harlan in almost 11 years. The last time we'd talked, both of us had considerably darker hair. "How'd you get this number?" I asked. "You'd be amazed what retirees do with free time." That sounded exactly like him. For a few minutes we caught up. Health. Families. A mutual friend recovering from knee surgery. Normal things. Then his voice changed. "Frank called me." Of course he had. I rubbed my forehead. I should have known. He said somebody used a name I haven't heard in 20 years. I didn't answer. The silence said enough. Jim chuckled. You know, people still tell that story. That's unfortunate. No. His voice softened. It isn't. I stared out at the parking lot below. A young couple unloaded groceries from a pickup truck. Life moving forward. Simple. Normal. Exactly the kind of life I'd wanted after leaving government service. Most of the people involved are retired now, Jim said. Some aren't. No. Another pause. Then he surprised me. Do you ever regret disappearing? The question hit harder than I expected, because the honest answer wasn't simple. Sometimes yes. Sometimes no. I regretted losing touch with people who mattered. I regretted missing reunions. I regretted allowing shame and guilt to convince me that isolation was easier. But I didn't regret leaving. Some experiences change how you see the world. After enough years, peace starts looking more valuable than recognition. I don't know, I finally said. Jim understood. He always had. Before hanging up, he said something that stayed with me. Don't spend so much time hiding from your past that you forget you survived it. Then he ended the call. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I attended church, bought groceries at Kroger, and tried to focus on ordinary things. Unfortunately, ordinary things weren't cooperating. By Monday afternoon, my phone started buzzing again. Texts, messages, social media notifications. Most came from relatives. Apparently, Derek had spent the weekend entertaining himself online. He had posted a picture from the barbecue. The caption read, "My mysterious government agent sister-in-law claims her nickname was Hades. Should we be worried?" Lots of laughing emojis. Comments. Jokes. More comments. Some harmless, some annoying. One cousin wrote, "Rachel probably watched too many action movies." Another said, "I still vote princess. I should have ignored it." Instead, I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Not because strangers were laughing, because family was, again, same pattern. Different year, different audience. I tossed my phone onto the couch. For a moment, anger flashed through me. Then embarrassment. Then something worse. Doubt. Maybe Derek was right. Maybe all of it belonged in the past. Maybe I was ridiculous for even thinking about it anymore. The trouble with old wounds is that they know exactly when to reopen. Late Tuesday afternoon, while I was paying bills at my kitchen table, another message arrived. This one wasn't from family. It was from Frank. Just 7 words. They still talk about that operation. I read the message 3 times, then a 4th. A knot formed in my stomach. Because if people were still talking about it, then something was coming. And for the first time since the barbecue, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it was. Frank's message sat on my phone for nearly an hour before I responded. What operation? The reply came almost immediately. You know exactly which one. I stared at the screen. Unfortunately, he was right. I did know. There are certain memories you never completely leave behind. You can lock them away. You can build a new life around them. You can avoid talking about them for 20 years. They're still there, waiting. I put the phone down and walked into my kitchen. The coffee maker was still warm from that morning. A half-finished crossword puzzle sat on the counter beside a bowl of peaches. Ordinary things. Lately, I found myself appreciating ordinary things more than ever. I was halfway through making another cup of coffee when my phone rang. This time, the caller ID showed Washington, D.C. My stomach tightened. I answered. "Hello. Rachel Morgan." A woman's voice. Professional. Confident. "Speaking. Please hold for Admiral Thomas Whitaker." I nearly dropped the phone. For several seconds, I honestly thought somebody was playing a prank. Then another voice came on. Older. Calm. Very real. "Rachel." I sat down immediately. The Admiral hadn't changed much. His hair was whiter now, but his voice sounded exactly the same. The last time we'd spoken, George W. Bush was still president. "Sir." "Still calling me sir after all these years?" "Old habits." He laughed. Somehow that made me even more nervous. We talked briefly. Mostly small things. Health. Retirement. People we'd both known. Then he got to the point. "There will be an event in Nashville next month." I already knew where this was heading. A military charity gala. Fundraising. Veterans support programs. Several retired senior officers attending. Nothing unusual, except one detail. "We'd like you there." I closed my eyes. "No." His answer came instantly. "You didn't even think about it." "I don't need to." "Rachel." "No." The word came out harder than intended. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked quietly, "How long are you planning to hide?" That question followed me long after the call ended. The next few days became increasingly uncomfortable. Word somehow spread that I had been contacted by people connected to the military community. I never confirmed anything. Didn't matter. Rumors have a way of growing without permission. By Friday, Derek had fully committed himself to the role of family comedian. He posted another joke online. Then another. Then another. One picture showed a woman from an old action movie holding 2 knives. The caption, "Rachel arriving at Thanksgiving." Hundreds of reactions. Most from people I didn't know. A surprising number from people I did. Normally I would have ignored it. This time it bothered me. Not because it was cruel. Because it was working. The comments section slowly transformed me into a joke. Again, the mysterious sister-in-law. The woman making up stories. The attention seeker. None of those descriptions fit. But once enough people repeat something, it starts sounding true. Even to yourself. A week later, Amanda called. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you going to Nashville?" I sighed. Apparently everyone knew except me. "Maybe." "Rachel." "What?" "Please don't let Derek scare you off." I laughed. "Derek doesn't scare me." "No, but he annoys you." That was fair. Amanda hesitated, then surprised me. "You know he's insecure, right?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Derek." "Very." That wasn't a sentence I'd ever expected to hear. Amanda continued. "He spends half his life trying to prove something." I thought about that. The constant bragging. The stories. The need to be the toughest guy in every room. Maybe she had a point. Still didn't excuse the behavior. But it explained some of it. A few days later, another package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. I froze. The picture looked old. Because it was. Nearly 23 years old. The edges had yellowed. The colors had faded. Several people stood beside a helicopter. Dust everywhere. Exhausted faces. Uniforms stained with dirt. I recognized every person in the image. Including myself. I sat down slowly. For a long time I just stared. People often imagine memory fading with age. Sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes one photograph brings everything back in perfect detail. The heat. The noise. The fear. The people who came home. The people who didn't. On the back of the photograph someone had written, "Thought you'd want this. Frank." I swallowed hard. Then noticed something else. A folded note tucked inside. Only one sentence. "Someone important remembers. That evening I called Frank." He answered on the second ring. "You sent the photo." "Yep." "Why?" A pause. Then, "Because you're acting like none of it mattered." I leaned back in my chair. The room suddenly felt very quiet. "Frank." "Rachel, do you know how many people disappear after service?" "Plenty." "Exactly." His voice softened. "And most of them deserve peace." I waited. But peace and hiding aren't the same thing. That sentence bothered me. Mostly because I couldn't argue with it. The following week became increasingly strange. Emails arrived. Invitations. Messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. One retired commander. 2 former team members. A military historian asking if I'd attend the Nashville event. I declined every request. Every single one. Then came Tuesday. The day everything changed. I was sitting at my desk sorting paperwork when my phone rang. Again. Another unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. A woman introduced herself as an executive assistant. Then she casually said something that made my pulse spike. "The Admiral would like to know if you've reconsidered." I laughed nervously. "Apparently he's persistent." "He is." "Why?" The woman paused. Then replied, "Because several people requested your presence." Several people. Not one. Several. That was new. I looked out my office window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Cars moved through afternoon traffic. Life continued as normal. But something underneath it had shifted. The past wasn't staying buried, whether I liked it or not. That evening I pulled the photograph out again. This time I noticed something I'd missed before. Standing near the edge of the frame was a younger Admiral Whitaker. Not front and center. Not posing. Watching. Remembering. The realization hit me slowly. This wasn't about nostalgia. This wasn't about old war stories. Someone at the highest levels of that community still remembered exactly who I was. And for reasons I couldn't yet understand, they wanted everyone else to remember too. The morning of the Nashville Gala, I almost didn't go. That wasn't an exaggeration. I stood in my apartment bedroom staring at a navy blue dress hanging on the closet door and seriously considered calling the hotel to cancel. My suitcase sat open on the bed. half packed, half abandoned. Maggie, my cat, watched me from the corner with the expression cats reserve for humans making bad decisions. "You'd stay home too, wouldn't you?" I asked. She blinked. Not helpful. For nearly 3 weeks I'd gone back and forth. One day I was attending, the next day I wasn't. Then I was, then I wasn't. Every time I pictured walking into that ballroom, a knot formed in my stomach. I wasn't afraid of strangers. I was afraid of attention. There's a difference. Eventually I picked up the dress, packed the suitcase, and left. The drive from Knoxville to Nashville took just under 3 hours. Traffic wasn't bad. Country music played quietly through the speakers. The closer I got, the more I questioned my decision. By the time downtown Nashville appeared on the horizon, I was actively considering turning around. Instead, I checked into the hotel, a large place near Broadway. Valet parking, polished marble floors, more expensive than anywhere I would have chosen myself. The gala started at 6. At 5:30, I was still sitting alone in my room, looking at the invitation, wondering why I'd agreed to come. Then my phone buzzed. Frank. His message contained only 4 words. "Already here, don't run." I laughed despite myself. The old man knew me too well. At 6:10, I finally walked into the ballroom. The room was enormous. Round tables, white tablecloths, military flags, veterans, families, donors, politicians, people talking over the sound of a live jazz trio. The atmosphere felt formal without being stiff, comfortable, respectful. I recognized several faces immediately. Retired officers, former colleagues, people I hadn't seen in decades. A few recognized me. Most didn't, which suited me just fine. I found Frank near the back of the room. The moment he saw me, he grinned. "There she is? You sound disappointed. I had $50 on you staying home." "Very encouraging," he laughed. For the first time all evening, I relaxed slightly. Frank had a gift for making things feel normal. Unfortunately, normal didn't last. Around 7 o'clock, I heard a familiar voice. Loud. Confident. Impossible to miss. "Derek." I froze. Frank looked over my shoulder. "Oh no." "Oh yes." I turned. There he was. Derek. Amanda beside him. And several relatives trailing behind. My stomach dropped. "What are they doing here?" Frank sighed. "I'm guessing somebody sold them tickets. Apparently somebody had." Amanda looked embarrassed. Derek looked excited. The difference mattered. He spotted me almost immediately. His grin widened. The same grin he'd worn at the barbecue. The one that always meant trouble. "Rachel." Several nearby guests turned. I closed my eyes briefly. Not now. Please, not now. But Derek was already approaching. Amanda looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. "Derek," I said. He shook my hand dramatically. "Fancy seeing you here." "You too." He looked around the ballroom, then lowered his voice just enough to sound insulting. "So this is where the secret agent reunion happens." Frank nearly spit out his drink. I shot him a warning look. That only made him laugh harder. Unfortunately, Derek interpreted the reaction as encouragement. Big mistake. For the next 20 minutes, he worked the room, telling jokes, making comments, dropping little remarks about my supposed mysterious past. Most guests ignored him. Some smiled politely. A few looked uncomfortable. The problem with attention seekers is that they rarely notice when a room turns against them. Around 8 o'clock, the evening program began. People took their seats. A speaker stepped onto the stage. Then another. Awards, recognition, stories. Everything proceeded normally, until the final presentation. The MC approached the microphone. His voice carried across the ballroom. "Tonight we'd like to recognize several individuals whose service remained largely unseen by the public." I felt Frank glance at me. My pulse accelerated. "Number?" "Surely not." The MC continued. "Some people spend their lives seeking recognition." A pause. "Others spend years avoiding it." The room chuckled softly. I had a terrible feeling where this was heading. Then my name appeared on the giant screen behind the stage. "Rachel Morgan." The entire ballroom turned, including Derek. My stomach sank. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Frank looked delighted. "The traitor." The MC smiled. "Rachel, would you join us?" For one horrifying moment, I considered refusing. Then the room started applauding. There was no escape. I stood, slowly. Every step toward the stage felt longer than the last. When I reached the front, another figure emerged from the side curtain. Admiral Whitaker. The room immediately grew quieter. The Admiral shook my hand, then turned toward the audience. "I've spent 38 years working alongside extraordinary people. His voice remained steady, measured, commanding. Some sought credit. He glanced at me. Some avoided it whenever possible. Laughter, then silence. The Admiral continued. He spoke about service, sacrifice, responsibility, not specific operations, not classified details, just enough. Enough for people to understand. Enough for people to realize there was far more to my story than they had assumed. Then he said something I never expected. Years ago, Rachel made a request. The room listened. Any recognition connected to her work should instead focus on families who lost loved ones. A murmur spread across the ballroom. The Admiral nodded. She never changed that position. I stared at the floor, embarrassed, overwhelmed, wishing the spotlight would disappear. Then another voice spoke. A retired commander I hadn't seen in 20 years. He stepped forward unexpectedly. That's true. The room turned. He smiled. Frankly, she fought harder against recognition than she ever fought against the people chasing her. Laughter spread throughout the audience. Even I smiled. Then came the moment everything finally collapsed for Derek. Because someone behind him asked a simple question. What exactly did she do? The commander laughed. Enough. That single word landed harder than any speech. Enough. Not boasting. Not exaggerating. Just enough. I looked toward Derek. His face had changed. The confidence was gone. The jokes were gone. For the first time since I'd met him, he seemed unsure what to say. Frank leaned toward him. Perfect timing. Son. Derek looked over. Frank smiled. I've met tougher people in nursing homes. The table exploded with laughter. Even Amanda laughed. Actually laughed. Derek turned bright red. The room wasn't mocking him cruelly. That was the worst part. People simply weren't taking him seriously anymore. For years, he'd built himself into the biggest personality in every room. Tonight, he wasn't. Not even close. And he finally realized it. The applause continued. Not because of me. Not really. Because people respected what they had learned. The truth had arrived quietly. Without drama. Without revenge. Without me saying much at all. And somehow that made it even more powerful. As I stood beneath the lights listening to the applause fade, I realized something surprising. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Derek. Not at my family. Not even at myself. For the first time in years, I felt free. The morning after the gala, I woke up in my hotel room feeling strangely light. Not happy. Not triumphant. Just lighter. For years, I'd carried around a weight I couldn't quite explain. Part guilt, part exhaustion, part fear that if people knew too much, they'd either judge me or expect something I couldn't give. Now the secret wasn't entirely secret anymore. And the world hadn't ended. Outside my window, downtown Nashville was already awake. Traffic crawled along the streets below. Tourists wandered toward Broadway. Delivery trucks unloaded supplies behind restaurants. Ordinary life moving forward. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and watched the city for nearly half an hour. My phone buzzed constantly. Text messages, emails, voicemails. Most were from people who had attended the gala. A few came from old friends I hadn't heard from in years. One was from a former teammate now living in Arizona. Another came from a widow whose husband had served with us decades earlier. Those messages meant more than the applause. By far. Recognition fades. People don't. Around 9 o'clock, Amanda called. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Morning. She sounded nervous. Hey. A pause. Then, I owe you an apology. I leaned back in my chair. Amanda wasn't someone who apologized easily. Not because she was stubborn. Because she usually avoided conflict altogether. For what? For a lot of things. Another pause. I should have stopped Derek years ago. I didn't answer immediately. She continued. I kept telling myself he was joking. The sadness in her voice caught me off guard. But after a while, I think I got used to it. I stared out the window. People often imagine family conflicts ending with dramatic speeches and perfect closure. Real life doesn't work that way. Most people don't wake up one morning and suddenly become better. Growth happens in uncomfortable pieces. I know, I said quietly. I'm sorry. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. That mattered. More than I expected. When I got back to Knoxville later that afternoon, life returned to normal surprisingly fast. Monday morning, I went to work. Tuesday, I paid bills. Wednesday, I took Maggie to the vet. The world didn't suddenly treat me differently. Honestly, I preferred it that way. A week later, I received an invitation from a veterans outreach organization. Then another. Then another. At first, I declined. Old habits. Eventually, Frank got involved. which was unfortunate, because Frank treated persuasion like a military operation. You've got experience. I've got retirement plans. You can help people. I already donate. That's not the same thing. The man was relentless. 3 months later, I found myself volunteering at a support group for military families, then mentoring younger veterans transitioning into civilian life, then helping organize fundraising events. Somewhere along the way, I stopped hiding. Not completely. There were still stories I wouldn't tell, memories I preferred to keep private. But there was a difference between privacy and isolation. For years, I'd confused the two. The biggest surprise came from my father. One Saturday afternoon, he invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. A small diner outside Knoxville we'd visited for decades. Same booths, same coffee, same pie display near the register. We talked about ordinary things. The weather, baseball, his blood pressure medication. Then he set down his fork. I was wrong. I looked up. My father rarely said those words. What about you? The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No excuses. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. Like somebody reviewing old decisions. I spent years thinking you were distant because you didn't care. I listened quietly. And maybe I never tried hard enough to understand why. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I nodded. That was enough. We didn't need a dramatic reconciliation. We had lunch, talked, went home. Sometimes that's what healing looks like, not fireworks. Consistency. As for Derek, well, life has a sense of humor. For several weeks after the gala, he became noticeably quieter. Not silent, just quieter. The endless boasting slowed down. The online jokes disappeared. The constant need to be the center of attention eased. Frank claimed it was personal growth. I suspected embarrassment played a larger role. Probably both. Then came Thanksgiving, the first major family gathering since Nashville. I knew people were curious. You could feel it. Questions floated around the room all afternoon. People tried to be subtle. Most failed. Finally, after dinner, one of my younger cousins asked the question everybody had been dancing around for months. Rachel, yeah, were you really called Hades? The room immediately went quiet. Every conversation stopped. Even Derek looked up. I couldn't help laughing. The poor kid looked terrified, like he'd accidentally stepped on a landmine. I took a sip of coffee, thought about the question, then smiled. That was a long time ago. A familiar voice answered from across the room. Maybe. Frank raised his glass. Everyone turned. The old man grinned. But legends don't expire. Groans. Laughter. Someone threw a napkin at him. Even Derek smiled. The moment passed. Conversation resumed. Life continued. Exactly as it should. Later that evening, while driving home through the Tennessee hills, I found myself thinking about revenge. Funny thing is, I never actually got the revenge I'd imagined when I was younger. There was no master plan, no public humiliation campaign, no clever trap, no dramatic victory speech. The real revenge turned out to be something much simpler. I stopped needing approval from people who had never bothered to understand me. The moment that happened, their judgment lost its power. And that's a far more lasting victory than any argument. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The people around us only see pieces of our story. Sometimes they see the worst chapter and assume that's the whole book. But they aren't always right. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or judged by appearances, you're not alone. And if this story reminded you of someone in your own life, I hope you'll carry that thought with you a little while longer.